Okay, listener, let's dive into something that I know I personally find tricky, asking for help at work. You've sent over some really interesting notes and even a whole podcast episode on this topic. I have a feeling we're going to uncover some strategies you can put into action right away.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We're constantly told teamwork is key, but then there's this almost unspoken pressure to figure everything out on our own.
Yes, and that's why I think this deep dive is so timely. Your notes actually highlight that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. It really resonated with me. It's about recognizing that you don't have to have all the answers to be a valuable contributor.
It's about leveraging the expertise around you to achieve something even greater. I'm curious, in your own work, what are the biggest things that hold you back from asking for help?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think for me, it's often that fear of appearing incompetent, like I should already know the answer or be able to solve the problem myself. I'm definitely a bit of a perfectionist in that way.
I think many of us can relate to that. The podcast you shared actually calls this the competence trap. We tie our worth to always having the solution, which can make it really hard to admit when we're stuck.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Competence trap. I like that. It's so true, though. And sometimes it's not even an individual thing, right? Like there could be this whole workplace culture of just figure it out. That makes it even harder to speak up when you need support.
Absolutely. Those unspoken expectations can be really powerful. For example, if you see your colleagues constantly pushing through challenges solo, you might feel pressure to do the same, even if it's not healthy or productive in the long run. Have you ever experienced that?
Definitely. I remember early in my career, there was this one project that involved a software program I'd never used before.
Yeah.
I spent hours trying to figure it out on my own, getting more and more frustrated. I think I even pulled an all-nighter trying to crack it.
Ouch. I can imagine that was rough. What happened?
Well, finally I caved and asked a colleague for help.
Yeah.
And you know what? She showed me this super simple shortcut. That solved the whole problem in like 2 minutes.
It's funny how often that happens, right? We waste so much time and energy trying to avoid asking for help, when often the solution is just a quick conversation away.
Exactly. And it's not just about time either. That experience taught me that asking for help can actually lead to stronger relationships with your colleagues. By admitting that I was struggling, I opened myself up to connecting with my coworker on a different level. Plus, I learned something new in the process.
That's such an important point. The podcast you share actually emphasizes that asking for help builds trust within a team. It shows vulnerability, which can actually make you more relatable and approachable.
It's like you're saying, hey, I trust your expertise and value your input, and in turn, that makes people more willing to help you.
Right. It creates this reciprocal relationship where everyone feels comfortable seeking and offering support. It's a win-win.
I totally agree. Now, I'm curious. If we know all these benefits, why is it still so hard to actually ask for help? What are some of those mental blocks we need to overcome?
That's a great question, and it's something the podcast dives into as well. They actually break down several common psychological barriers that prevent us from asking for help, beyond the competence trap we mentioned earlier.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's unpack those barriers.
One of the biggest barriers they highlight is the fear of being judged or seen as a burden. We worry about bothering people or taking up their valuable time.
Oh, that's a big one for me. I always imagine the other person rolling their eyes thinking, can't they just figure this out themselves?
It's that inner critic talking. And the podcast offers a really interesting perspective on this. They suggest that most people actually enjoy helping others. It makes them feel valuable and contributes to a more positive team dynamic.
That's so true. I know. I love feeling like I've helped a colleague out. It's a nice boost.
Exactly. So it's often more about our own perceptions than reality. And then there's the perfectionism trap we talked about earlier. Sometimes we hold back because we want to prove we can handle everything ourselves.
Yeah, it's that stubborn I can do it all mentality. That could backfire big time. I know I've definitely fallen into that trap before. And it's usually not pretty.
The irony is by not asking for help, we often end up creating more work for ourselves, and even the team as a whole. Mistakes can snowball, deadlines get missed, and the quality of the work can suffer.
It's like we're so focused on looking competent that we miss out on the opportunity to actually become more competent by learning from others.
That's such a great point. And the podcast also highlights another barrier, something they call clarity paralysis.
Clarity paralysis. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
Essentially, it's the feeling of being so overwhelmed that you don't even know where to start or what to ask for help with. You're stuck in this cycle of overthinking, and it prevents you from taking action.
Ooh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like you're drowning in a sea of information and to-dos.
Yeah.
and you just freeze up.
Exactly. And the podcast suggests that one of the best ways to overcome this is to break down the problem into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So instead of saying, help, I'm drowning, you're saying, hey, can you throw me a life preserver for this specific part of the problem?
Precisely. And the more specific you can be about what you're struggling with, the easier it will be for the other person to provide targeted and effective help.
That makes so much sense. It takes the guesswork out of it for them,
Hmm.
which probably makes them more likely to help, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us to another key insight from the podcast, the importance of framing your request for help in a way that's both clear and respectful of the other person's time. They even provide a helpful script for approaching a colleague for assistance. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, please. I'm always up for trying out new scripts. It takes some of the pressure off when you have a starting point.
They suggest saying something like, "Hi, name, I've been working on specific task project, and I've hit a point where I could really use your input. Would you have some time to chat about this with me?"
Okay, I like that. It's direct, but also acknowledges that you're asking for their time, which is always important.
And they go on to emphasize the power of explaining why you're asking for help from this particular person. You could say something like, "I know you've done some amazing work with a related skill project, and I really value your insights on this."
Ooh, I like that. It's like
Uh,
you're giving them a little ego boost, right? But in a genuine way, of course. It shows that you're not just randomly asking anyone. You've specifically sought them out for their expertise.
Exactly. And the podcast emphasizes that this type of framing can be really effective because it shifts the dynamic from you asking for a favor to you seeking a collaboration.
To me, like you're saying, let's team up and conquer this challenge together.
Right. And that's much more appealing than simply being asked to fix someone else's problem. It creates a sense of shared ownership and can actually strengthen the relationship between the two of you.
I'm seeing a pattern here. Asking for help is actually a really strategic move, both for your own work and your relationships at work. It's not a weakness, but rather a skill that can help you advance in your career.
That's a fantastic insight. And it ties back to something we were discussing earlier, the idea that successful leaders often attribute their achievements to their willingness to seek out guidance and support. They recognize that they don't have to have all the answers. And in fact, they often achieve more by leveraging the expertise of others.
It's like they're creating a brain trust around them,
Yeah.
a network of people they can go to for advice and support. That's so powerful.
And it's not just about leaders either. This applies to everyone, regardless of their position or experience level. The more comfortable you are with asking for help, the faster you'll learn, grow, and advance in your career.
I love that. It's like you're giving yourself permission to be a lifelong learner. Okay, I'm sold on the importance of asking for help. But what about those times when someone says no? How do you handle rejection without taking it personally?
That's a great question. And the podcast actually addresses this directly, offering several practical tips for navigating those situations.
Okay, let's dive into those tips. Because let's be honest, rejection is never fun, especially in a professional setting. So let's talk about those times. When our carefully crafted request for help gets met with a no, what does the podcast recommend for handling that gracefully?
Well, the first thing they emphasize is the importance of remembering that it's often not personal. The person you asked might be swamped with their own deadlines, have other commitments, or simply not have the specific expertise you're looking for.
It's so easy to take it personally, though, right? Especially when you've worked up the courage to ask in the first place.
I understand. It can feel like a bit of a blow, but the podcast encourages us to reframe that initial no as an opportunity for problem solving. Instead of getting discouraged, they suggest asking for alternative recommendations. You could say something like, "I totally understand. Is there anyone else you think might be able to lend a hand with this?"
Ooh, I like that. It shows that you're resourceful and still determined to find a solution, even if it's not the one you initially envisioned.
Exactly. It keeps the conversation going in a positive and collaborative direction. And sometimes, a simple reframing of your initial request can make a difference. Perhaps the person you asked didn't fully understand the scope of your need or how their skills could be applied.
So it's worth taking a step back and asking yourself, did I explain this clearly enough? Is there a different way I could present this to make it more appealing or relevant to their expertise?
Precisely. And remember, timing is everything. The person you approached might be in the middle of a crazy week or dealing with other priorities. The podcast suggests that it's perfectly acceptable to circle back later and say, "Hey, I know you were swamped last week, but I was wondering if you might have some time now to chat about the project or task."
That makes sense. Sometimes a little persistence combined with respect for their time can go a long way.
And ultimately, it comes back to that core idea we've been discussing. Asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. It takes courage to put yourself out there, and even more resilience to handle those no's gracefully.
I'm really struck by how much this whole conversation ties into creating a positive and supportive workplace culture. It's not just about individual skills, but about fostering an environment where everyone feels comfortable seeking and offering help. I think it's a great transition to the final point we wanted to touch on today. How can we become better at creating that space where others feel comfortable asking us for help?
That's such a crucial question, and I think it's one we often overlook. It's easy to focus on our own needs when it comes to asking for help, but it's equally important to consider how we can make ourselves more approachable and accessible as resources for others.
Yes, it's about shifting from a me mindset to a we mindset, where we're all invested in each other's success.
And the podcast episode actually touches on this by suggesting we ask ourselves, how can we make it easier for others to seek our help? It's a powerful question to reflect on.
I love that. It puts the responsibility on us to create that open and welcoming environment. So what are some practical ways we can do that?
Well, I think it starts with being mindful of our communication style. Are we approachable and open to questions? Do we make eye contact and actively listen when someone is speaking to us? Or are we sending out those "don't bother me" vibes?
Ouch.
Hmm.
I've definitely been guilty of sending out those vibes in the past, especially when I'm stressed or on a tight deadline. It's a reminder that even small nonverbal cues can have a big impact on how comfortable someone feels approaching us.
Yes. And it's not just about our body language, it's about the words we use too. Do we respond to questions with patience and encouragement? Or are we short and dismissive, even if unintentionally?
I think sometimes we underestimate how much our tone of voice can influence whether someone feels safe asking for help. It's like we need to create a verbal welcome mat that makes people feel safe to step into our space.
Absolutely. And it's also about being proactive and offering support. Do we check in with our colleagues regularly, not just to monitor their progress on tasks, but also to see how they're doing? Sometimes a simple, "Hey, how's it going with that project? Anything I can help with?" can open the door to a really valuable conversation.
I love that. It's about showing genuine interest in their well-being and creating a space where they feel comfortable voicing any challenges they might be facing. And it doesn't have to be a big formal thing. It's about those little moments of connection, those small gestures that communicate, I'm here for you if you need me.
And one of the most powerful things we can do is model the behavior we want to see. If we're open about our own struggles and willing to ask for help ourselves, it sends a message that it's okay to not have all the answers, that we're all in this together.
That's such a powerful point. It's about normalizing help-seeking behavior and creating a culture where it's seen as a sign of strength and collaboration rather than weakness or incompetence.
Exactly. And when we create that kind of environment, everyone wins. We get the support we need to thrive, our colleagues feel empowered to contribute their best work, and the team as a whole achieves greater success.
I love that vision. It's inspiring. And it makes me feel optimistic about the potential for creating truly supportive and collaborative workplaces.
And I think that's a great note to wrap up our deep dive on today. I hope this exploration of asking for help has given you not only practical tips, but also a fresh perspective on the power of vulnerability, collaboration, and mutual support in the workplace.
Absolutely. And listener, here's a final thought to ponder. Think about someone you work with, who you admire for their willingness to help others. What specific qualities or actions make them so approachable and supportive? Maybe they're a great listener, or maybe they're always willing to share their knowledge generously. Whatever it is, I encourage you to identify those qualities and see how you can cultivate them in your own interactions. You never know the ripple effect of positivity and collaboration you might create.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Remember, asking for help is a sign of strength. And creating a space where others feel comfortable doing the same is a gift to yourself, your colleagues, and the entire team.